and I'm going to start with a couple of questions, if I may, just to break the ice. Tell us a little bit about well, I have a basic question, actually. The gentleman's name is Brigadier General Moshe Tamir, but everyone calls him Chiko. So I'd like to know where the name Chiko comes from, and then I've got another question after that.
I can't even remember why, but you can't have a general without a nickname. So. And also the other question I wanted to ask you is, I'd like to know where your English is from. You speak fluent English in my estimation. Did you spend time in the UK? Did you go to British boarding schools? Where does that come from? Actually, my father served in Italy, and I went to an international school many years ago.
Okay, so that's where that's from. And you live now, if I can ask you to speak a little bit louder, Chiko,
okay.
And where do you live now in the state of Israel? Just tell us where you're from.
I live on the border with Lebanon, in Metula, which is the northern part of Israel, just on the border, about 100 meters from the border.
So a short commute to the office.
Very.
Okay, good stuff. Well, we're looking forward to learning from you, and the first thing that I want to know really is, I want to sort of pull the lens back about not so much just Israel, but also the Middle East. If you open up a map of the Middle East, obviously you see borders delineating country from country, but you actually have a different perspective about that. You talk about not only the fact that the map needs to be viewed through ideological lines and alignments and conflicts, but also to talk about how those newfound or those emerging ideological lines actually impact Israel's security situation directly. So let's start there.
I think this is also represent the change in the challenges that Israel had in the last few decades in its security system. But if you look at the Middle East, usually you go to CENTCOM, probably when you see the first map, you will see a country map. You'll see Egypt, you'll see Israel, you'll see borders drawn. Now, in Europe, in other continents, these borders have a significance, a deeper significance. And at least for the first 5 decades or 4 decades in Israel, this is what the challenge was, that the Arab states around Israel saw Israel as an unlegitimate country. And the challenge was to defend from conventional militaries that were sent by their countries, by formal governments. Now, and for many years, people got used to look at the Middle East map in this way. There are countries in this way. But the map that has arose in the last decades, and it's quite clear, is not borders and that were actually drawn by Britain and France mostly in the Middle East and dictated, which not always had deep logic, especially not the ethnic and the religious one. And if I put you now the ethnic religious map to the Middle East, which anyone can look and Google for a moment, then you see immediately a completely different map. You see a Shiite, Sunni Muslim area with some small ethnic groups that has to be collected. And if you look at it in this way, you understand immediately what's happening today in the Middle East. So I think this map is influencing today the security situation of Israel much more than what we used to look at the territorial countries map. And this is what we will talk. And this is also signs the change between the challenges that we had in conventional fighting against conventional military and governments, which usually operate by interests. You can look at the Egyptian interest when they fight 67 war or 73 war. You can analyze them and you can understand them in a modern way. It's very hard on the other side to understand exactly what is the Iranian regime and the people who lead the revolution want, believe in, and the way they are thinking, because it's a completely different way from the way that we are thinking. And therefore, also how you build yourself in order to meet this challenge is a very different way. I think a lot of our discussion will be around this.
So how has that change affected directly the manner in which Israel defends itself? What's the security doctrine that's been impacted by that?
Well, I think very similar to what happened. I attended in the US in '99, the Army War College. And I remember that at that time my last assignment before I came, I was the Special Forces battalion commander, and I came to that car line. And I met the first time General Scales, and he presented to us a program called Army After Next, and then Army 2020, and Army, and every 3 years a new general came in the US military and built a new plan of how the army is going to move from a conventional warfare to unconventional, unsymmetrical. They had names from here to China, which I cannot remember anymore. But this only represents the problem that all militaries around the world had to cope with. Now, mostly at the beginning, the American military, which changed dramatically afterwards, had to do it in a philosophical way, because there was no fighting on the ground almost, so everyone invented things. While the Israelis went the other, no one thought about it in a philosophical way or in a higher level, but only practical, how do we cope with it? And there was also, I think, some tension between the old guard and the newcomers like me, young officers, of how to cope with it, and the difference is huge. When you need to cope with militaries that have heavy maneuvers, that have to maneuver and want to conquer parts of Israel, or you are dealing with terror organizations, big terror organizations that launch terror attacks and especially rockets of all kinds, mortars, and it's a completely, on the operational and tactical level, it's a completely set of skills, capabilities that you need in order to cope with it. And I think, like the American military, we had to adapt very quickly, and sometimes we did it late, and we suffered from it. But you see militaries like the Russian military that hasn't taken this turn for a long time, and you can see the influence of what's happening to them today. It was a huge challenge, still is, and probably we'll talk about the details. But I think the most important thing is that the difference between these two way of fighting is that in unconventional warfare or asymmetrical warfare, you need to invent a new paradigm each time you go to battle. What you did in one place does not fit the other place. So you need leadership that is not just well skilled to do, like in the old guard, a tank commander could be an idiot. If he's bold, if he's strong enough in his mind, and but not very clever, he could be a very good tank commander and maybe a great hero that will save his country. If you have now this same battalion commander put in Afghanistan or in Lebanon or in any other, he needs to understand the paradigm, which is much more complex, and in higher levels, especially division and above, and even in a brigade level, you need an innovative commander that can build a new paradigm and implement it, and it's complicated. And this is, I think, what you're seeing in most militaries, this change.
I just want to digress for a moment. You made mention of what's going on between Russia and Ukraine. I know that the IDF studies Russia pretty closely, including delegations over to do that. Just without spending too much time on it, did you anticipate that they would walk into this mire when you saw what was going on, or did you, like many, expect that it would be something of a swift campaign for the Russians?
I anticipated the Russians will work the way they did, but I didn't anticipate the Ukrainians will counter them the way they did, and they are doing it very smartly. And so I think the surprise here is not the way that the Russians acted, because they believe that with enough force they will break everything and no one will really stand to them. It's only going to be a show of force. They were very surprised that it was not that way. So they were more preparing for a parade than a real fighting, and they're paying the price for that now. But the Ukrainians, I think they surprised everyone. with their capabilities and especially their commitment to do what they're doing.
So, can we go around the horn a little bit with regard to Israel? We've talked about the map of the Middle East, and you've talked about how that's fundamentally changed the way that Israel had to look at itself. We'll get into that in more granular detail, I think, during the questions from the audience. But I'd like to talk a little bit about, this talk is about Israel's national security priorities and considerations. So let's start first of all with Lebanon and link the map that you spoke about to what's going on in Lebanon. You're a veteran of many years of service there, many campaigns there. You stood up the elite counter-terror force that is known as EGOZ. That was you who formed that up to fight in Southern Lebanon and really take the offensive to Hezbollah. Tell us how you see Lebanon.
Well, I think Lebanon is an amazing example of what's happening to the Middle East. There is a big Shiite community in Lebanon, which has connections to Iran more than 1,000 years. There are schools, madrasas, who teach Shiite within the south of Lebanon for many years. And the moving of scholars from Lebanon to Iran, especially Iraq, Qom and other was very frequent. But this the Shiite community in South Lebanon was the quietest community, actually also the poorest. And what's really amazing is that it was the one who is connected to Israel mostly. Like the Druze, the Shiite in the south of Lebanon had very good connections with Israel. I live on the border. I can tell you simple stories. The farmers in the north of Israel used to sell their fruits and everything in the villages of South Lebanon because the Shiite community in South Lebanon was considered a very friendly one. They would come to work on our plantations, so there was a constant. In the first Lebanese war in 1982, actually Israel liberated these villages from the grip of the PLO. The PLO deployed in the south of Lebanon after being expelled from Jordan. And actually what they did, they built a military force that was upon these villages, and they really didn't like it. So the Israelis were accepted with rice in that area. So what changed this community so rapidly that it became one of the most extreme areas? So the Shiite revolution has to do with a lot of change, but actually, I don't know if many of you know, the Revolutionary Guard, the Iranian one, before they started the revolution in Iran, before they took over the embassy and everything that they did, they trained in Lebanon. And who trained them are not Shiites from Lebanon, but the PLO, some of like Mounia, who was a PLO activist that trained them to go to Lebanon. And then with the other political situation, Musa Sadr and other within the community, the community changed radically. We started seeing it, we didn't believe it because we knew these people very well. And you saw that this change and the Iranian influence suddenly took this community from a quiet community to the leading community in Lebanon. Actually, they took over Lebanon. And now what you have is a strange situation that the Hezbollah is stronger than the Lebanese country, even economically and the way it's organized. I'm not talking even militarily. I'm talking first of all on the simple, you look at the nursing, hospitals, schools, everything that the Shiite community enjoys today, or whoever is cooperating with Hezbollah. So it's a country inside a country that is being really run by Hezbollah. And they have built from a small extreme terror organization that Mounia started in the 80s. You look at the Marine Force headquarters, you look at the embassy, the French embassy, the US embassy. He started as a real terrorist. By the way, he invented the suicide bombers. So you can see, and they're very talented people close to Iran. And step by step, they build an army. It's an unseen army, but an army that holds a very strong firepower. has more than 60,000 people serving for it, so it's but it's not a real military. We call it terror organization, but it's a real militia with heavy guns, heavy ammunition, and this is what Israel has to cope with. On one side, they are under the Lebanese country, so you are saying Lebanon, but really you mean Hezbollah. And when you say Hezbollah, you really mean Iran. And so this is I think, the situation that we are. So currently, it's a matter of deterrence between Israel and the Lebanese country. It's a proxy organization, but it is valued highly in Iran, and they will use it whenever they need it. When they will need it, it's a big question in Iran. The last time we had a conflict with them, it was a mistake, and the Iranians were not pleased with the Second Lebanese War, which was started by a kidnapping of the soldiers, that actually Mounia was behind it.
When you say it was a mistake, you mean it was their mistake? It was an error of judgment on their part?
I think it wasn't such a judgment. You know, Mounia couldn't help himself. You know, the joke with the frog and the scorpion, trying to cross the. That's this is, and he convinced Nasrallah that it will work, but it didn't work. At the end, I think this is a misjudgment, because it's a weapon or a tool that the Iranians, like any other tool, are holding for the time that they need, and we see it when they need it. When they have pressures from the Americans on one side, they will start pressing Israel. So it's one system coming from Tehran, going through Iraq, and coming to South Lebanon. And I think this is also what will dictate how we have to cope with them.
And when you say it's a deterrent, so 2 points on that very, very briefly. Deterrence works until it doesn't work. I mean, I was in that Second Lebanon War in 2006, and I remember as quickly as we were stood down, Chiko, we were told, okay, you'll be back there by this time next year, and that hasn't happened since 2006. How long do you think the deterrence is going to last there?
It's you never say how long, or you don't ask questions of timetable in the Middle East. It will take as long as it will take, and I cannot get into Khamenei's head and understand what he's thinking. One day, what we are seeing, we will get to Iran, but everything has to do with what Iran is thinking now. The serious thing that we need to take into consideration, then they mean what they say. It's hard for Western people when a country says we are going to distinguish the state of Israel. This is our aim. This is our first tactical aim in our whole strategy, and we are going to do it. So many Israelis and other Westerns say, okay, it's only for saying no. They mean it, and they are preparing for it. And step by step, I can show you the steps that they are taking in order to do it. One day it will happen. They will feel strong enough that they can start the attack on Israel. It will not be one war. It will be a long attrition war. But at the end, they will try to achieve what they're saying.
And so we're deterring them from another round, but is it accurate to say that the primary role of Hezbollah right now is to deter the state of Israel from hitting the Iranian nuclear weapons facilities?
No, I think also the Iranians understand that it's not on the same level. With everything I said about Hezbollah, at the end, it's a threat, but it's not a threat to the survival of Israel. It can be annoying, it can be hurting, but Hezbollah cannot destroy the state of Israel while a nuclear bomb can. So it's a different scale, and when you push someone to the wall with someone means to distinguish you, and he holds the weapon to do it, and he has the mean and the intention to do it, and I think it's a completely different discussion. Takes us to a completely different discussion.
So let's move a little bit around. Let's go to Judea and Samaria. Now you were, for those who don't know, General Tamir was absolutely instrumental in turning the tide. Maybe if you would speak for a few minutes about that, turning the tide of terror activities against the state of Israel by way of the homicide and suicide bombings that were coming. And there was an operation launched, a large-scale operation by then Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, to really remove that threat, to defang that threat. It was General Tamir who pushed for the notion of the Israeli Defense Forces going into these urban areas. He proved the concept extremely well. and he fought there and led the battle there. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about that, if you would, briefly, though I know you don't like to harken back, but also talk to us about the future of Judea, Samaria, the West Bank.
I will go straight to the situation today and the future. Let's leave the back for a moment to.
Okay, but I'm going to bring you back to it then. Okay.
But first of all, it's a big tragedy. But within that, if I step back and look at it, on the Palestinian side, the Palestinian young generation is the most educated people in the Middle East, especially in the Arab world. Their economy is doing quite well because it's always attached to the Israeli economy, comparing to Syria, Jordan, Egypt, whatever you want around it. But when you are well educated and you live very near Israel and you have your interconnection with Israel all the time, then the expectation rise. And when you have such a gap in the expectation, the equation is clear. You get a huge frustration, especially when you see no real future to change it, because we are caught in a cube, and I will try to describe it because it's hard. On one side, we understand that if we go to the two-state solutions, everyone in Israel really understands that. Then the other state is a Hamas state. I don't think there is discussion. I was the division commander in Gaza when Hamas took over from the Palestinian Authority. You really do not want to witness such occasions, I can tell you. They literally took the regime and threw it from the fourth floor they threw him off the roof down, and there was a new regime like in one day. They killed everyone who was even trying to resist, and that's it. And from that on, Hamas, we have a Hamastan in Gaza. Now, it's clear that this is what will happen in the West Bank. Now, West Bank is not Gaza. In Gaza, we could do it. We built a big wall. We are having a military system to protect us. And now the situation is that we are coping only with what's coming out of Gaza. We're not dealing with what's happening internally. We cannot do it in the West Bank. It's too near to Israeli centers. There are Israelis along the border and inside that territory, and it's just not possible. On the other side, on both sides, there is no leadership that can take the hard decision to compromise. There was for a certain time Israeli leadership that was willing to do it, but on the other side, we've not matured, not the Israeli side. And also we will always blame them that they cannot take the decision to give up the big dream about full Palestine, and they will tell you about the Israelis that cannot live this dream, and both sides cannot be practical. So I'm really sadly, I'm saying my generation, I'm telling it to my kids, we cannot solve it. Not on their side. I know them very well. We work for them, we fight them, and we know them very well. They cannot take this decision. And unfortunately, also my generation cannot do it. It will not happen in this generation. Maybe you will do it. And what this means is, with what I told you, is probably that we will see another round of violence. Even though we are trying to avoid it in every way. I don't know if you are following the details of what's happening in Israel, but Israel is really working hard to try to keep the flames down, but I'm not sure we'll succeed to do it. And on the other side, the Palestinian Authority is getting old. There's no real change there. And they are also not effective as they used to be. So if you look at these two axes and add it to what I told you, no hope and a generation with frustration, probably I don't see how anyone can stop this train. I hope it will be, and then going on, we'll need to keep actually the basics of what we are doing here. I hope that both sides will learn to fine-tune it much better than what we do today, but I don't see a solution. It will take really brave leaders on both sides to take this solution, and a completely different mindset of this current generation to go through this process. We tried it once. and the consequences, we tried it too early, the consequences were horrible. And it's a sad situation, not to this forum, but speaking to Americans have this simple thing: if there is something wrong, just fix it. And they cannot accept that there are some problems that they cannot fix. But after Afghanistan and after Iraq, I hope that they learned that not every problem is a nail, even if you hold only a hammer in your hand. And this is one of these problems that, at least from my perspective, cannot be solved so quickly.
So, you mentioned, I just have one question before I turn to Gaza, and then we'll talk a little bit more about other topics. You mentioned in your response that Israel is dealing with what happens beyond the Gaza Strip, not what happens within the Gaza Strip, and that's a consequence of Ariel Sharon's withdrawal from the Gaza Strip in 2005. Do you think what's commonly known as the disengagement, just feel free to move on if you don't want to talk about it, but was Ariel Sharon's plan to make further withdrawals from the West Bank, Judea and Samaria? And why did that not come about, separate to his health complications? Was that all it was?
Very simple. There was no one who could take that decision next step. There are two ways in order to, from what I described to you. So how do you take it from here? The situation will remain the same. So we have two options. One is what we are doing in the West Bank, is to be involved in the security situation inside the Palestinian territories and cities, and to be involved into it. And then first of all, we don't want to do it. We don't want to be involved in that. We don't want to be responsible for their internal security. But when the authority does not do it, we have no other alternative. But then you have the legitimacy. It looks bad. It feels bad. I have 4 kids in the military doing it. I'm doing it today still. I volunteer to go on operations to see how they work. And it's horrible operations. Anyone who is an operator will tell you to go into houses, to arrest people. Counter-terror it's not a regular warfare. It's a difficult warfare. It's complicated. It's leaving scars in the people who are dealing with it. And I can tell you, one of my sons is a major in the Israeli Special Forces, and we have a lot of talks about it. It ruins your heart. It's not a simple thing. We don't want to do it. On the other side, you don't want a Hamas state. So what we did, the two solutions: either you disengage, you go out and you let them live their life and accept that Hamas will lead, or you stay involved. Two horrible options. We did it in Gaza. Some people in Israel say it was a big mistake. I think it was the right thing to do. I think there will be, the more the Palestinian Authority will be stronger, they will grow stronger, then Israel can pull out, and then de facto will be separated more, and they will start living their own lives, build their own economy stronger. That's the only thing that at least in the visible future I can see.
So let's turn to Gaza. You talked about the difficulties of disengaging, and Hamastan, you have a real life example of that. I'll start with one basic question about the Gaza Strip. Is the Gaza Strip a strategic, what's going on there, is that a strategic threat to the state of Israel? And if it's not, can it become a strategic threat?
First of all, it's influencing the Israeli economy, the Israeli society, people of many, of course it's strategic. Is it a matter of, is that a threat which threats the survival of Israel? No. But it's a strategic problem, and it has to have a strategic solution, because on one side you have Israeli security, on the other side you have Hamas, but you have people living there. There are 2.4 million people living today in Gaza, and their life is a bad regime, bad economy, bad everything that you can think of. And this is again the dilemma. The more we are connecting to their economy, the more we are giving them, the expectation grows. And Hamas, in order to manage these expectations, usually the easiest way to manage high expectation, which cannot be materialized, is to go to war. They have not invented it. It's as long as human history. And this is again the problem that we have in Gaza. It's the same thing.
So we've talked a little bit about Lebanon. We've talked a little bit about Judea, Samaria, the West Bank. We've talked a little bit about Gaza. Now, you, in your response just now, you said, yes, of course, it's a strategic threat, the Gaza Strip. But I can tell you there are many, many analysts, specifically here in the US and analysts in Israel, who say it's not a strategic threat. I've always personally thought it is a strategic threat. I'm very pleased that you feel it is, though it's not an existential threat. But let me ask you a question. In each of those cases, you've said it's not an existential threat. What happens if there is a combination of threats? If, for example, the Gaza Strip should erupt at the same time as Hezbollah should erupt, what would Israel be like on a two-front basis? Is it prepared for that? Is it ready for that? Does it have a plan for that?
Of course, this is what Israel, people who are responsible for the security understand it may happen. And again, I don't think all these combined forces have the power to do more than what they are doing today. It will be a harder situation. Israel probably will use more means in order to challenge it, but I don't think this is the real change, because everything, if it will happen, when it will happen, it has to be to do with Iran. There is something that connects everything behind it, that pushes the money into it, that pushes the weapons into it, that pushes the ideology. If you will see people from the Quds force, you will see them in Jordan, you will see them in Gaza, you will see them in Lebanon, you will see them in Yemen, and you will see them all around the Middle East. This is what they are doing now. They are not planting flowers, and they are not helping the economy. What they're doing everywhere is building terror organization, military forces to materialize the revolution target, what its ideology. And the ideology is building an Islamic state from one sea to another sea. And a Jewish state has no place within this territory. It's clear. So the first thing they want to do, they aim at doing, is to clean this area from a Jewish state. They believe it in all their hearts. If you meet with them, if you hear them talking, they have a very structured ideology and way of thinking. Why should it happen? Why Israel has no right to exist? And when I look at them, I understand. I've been fighting these people for 40 years. I know they mean what they say, and we need to take them very seriously.
My last two questions. So, you're talking a lot about Iran, and we understand all of that. But I believe in 2003, the Iranians put a moratorium on their nuclear weapons program because the United States was kind of on the march in the area, right? And that was a result of what Prime Minister Netanyahu repeatedly refers to as a credible military threat. And once that credible military threat was on the table, the Iranians paused and in fact declared that they had this program and so forth. Now, just out of interest, do you believe that the state of Israel has a credible military threat, inclusive of the will to wield that threat?
Well, maybe a politician. I will not answer you directly. I will tell you this way.
Could you speak a bit?
In order to meet this challenge that the Iranians are putting, Israel cannot be alone. So the Abraham Accord is just a first step to build an alliance. Israel cannot lead this alliance. The US has to lead it. And no one can cope with Iran alone. So as long as you see American will and intention to lead this coalition that will cope with the Iranians, then you push them back and they are deterred. Everything they do is under the consideration that if they take the wrong step at the wrong time, they will be attacked. The Iranians understand very well when the Americans have full intention in what they say. The moment, and they are very sensitive to this, the moment they understand, it's gone. then what will happen? The Abraham Accord will collapse because these countries, the Gulf countries, will not stand against Iran on their own, not Saudi Arabia, not others. They will collapse. Israel will not be able to hold. It will be much easier for the Iranians to operate their proxy organizations like Hezbollah, like the Houthis and others. And what you will see is that actually they are succeeding in fulfilling their strategy. Now, it's very simple, but you have to look at it as a system. It's not if Israel has the capability to attack, let's say we will attack. If the Iranians decide to have nuclear weapons and to use them, they will. Even if we attack them once, so it will take a few years, they will learn how to do it, they will dig deeper in the mountains. At the end, it's a big country, strong country that has a lot of resources, and they will do it. Now, this is a weapon that was invented in World War II. It's almost ancient history. We are speaking about nuclear capabilities. It's not that difficult to get it. The only thing that we need to look at it, it's like any other conflict or any other strategic problem that the US has around the globe. Now here, it's not that Iran is standing alone. There is Russia behind it, and there is China behind it. And the earlier, I believe, the earlier the American administration will understand that it's not just a small problem, it's a global problem in one of the important areas in the world, and they need to cope with it. And I see, if you look at it at the, for instance, on the military level, you see that CENTCOM understands it very well, pushes the US to do it from every direction. You just see the amount of visits of the commander of CENTCOM to Israel in the last few years comparing to the decade before, even though there was a change, even moving Israel into CENTCOM. All of this, it means that the military has the understanding with what they need to be challenged, but it's not enough.
My last question, we did go around, but we skipped a country, and that was Syria. And I want to ask you a little bit about Syria, because there's been some criticism and some praise. Different people have different views about Israel's response to Russia, Ukraine. And what I want to talk about is the national security importance of what goes on over the skies of Syria for a moment, just so that people understand what the considerations of Israel are vis-a-vis Iran.
First of all, to answer the Ukrainian issue, Israel has not the benefit to be the right country to hold the justice of countries in the world. We would really like it, but we need to defend ourselves. Now, again, Iran is building a force, and I don't know how acquainted are you with what's happening in Syria, but they are moving population, Shiite population from Iraq, from northern Syria, from remote areas in the Middle East to be settled along the border of Israel. You will see new settlements that are it's like new settlements, but really it is militia. And behind it, they are building the regular force that they are building, which is deeply concealed within the population. And they are moving weapons because this is the only land route that they have from Iran to through Lebanon, through Iraq to Syria and Lebanon. And this is part of their strategy of building the force around Israel in order to achieve this. So for Israel, the freedom of operation in Syria is a matter of highly strategic interest. We cannot give it up. The Russians, if they only press one button, then the whole game changes there. As long as they are not operating their land-to-air missiles, full defense in Syria, Russian operated, then the Israeli Air Force can work there quite freely, and we think that we are doing quite a good job in avoiding this force buildup in Syria, and we really don't have the benefit of giving it up, and this is why we need to maneuver. We don't like it. Sometimes you need to chew it, but it is what it is. We cannot give up the freedom of action in Syria in any way. It will be disastrous.
Thanks, Chiko. We're going to take some questions from the audience by show of hands. Just a quick Miriam Institute rule. It's one question, one answer, and then on to the next person, just out of deference to everybody here. And by show of hands, I don't know, Professor, do you want the professor's prerogative?
No.
No one has a question? Okay, great. We'll start with you. Just say your name. Can you say it loudly for the purpose of the recording, please?
Of course. My name is Soumya, and I'm a second-year graduate student. Thank you so much for the talk. This past summer, I was in Israel with Ben and Professor Scholz. We were working there, and there was a small little clash as compared to others. And it was very interesting to see that Egypt was, at least that's what the news said, Egypt was helping the mediation between PIJ and Israel. So I was curious about your thoughts on what the Egyptian-Israel relationship looks right now and where we can see it go in the future.
So first of all, I think Israel and Egypt has a mutual interest to keep the peace. Egypt is enjoying good support from the US and openness to Europe and openness to other things. The second common interest is that the Gaza Strip will not rise. You remember that Hamas is actually part of the Muslim Brotherhood, which short history was took over government in Egypt for a short time, which till now the current regime, the people around him, the military and everything remembers very well what it may happen. And so the interest is to keep things quiet also between Israel and Egypt, because the moment there is fighting between Hamas and Israel, there are internal issues that are coming up in Egypt. So there is a lot of common interest. There's a lot of cooperation in many levels, but there is no normalization like in others. So meaning that Israeli citizens don't really get to meet Egyptians, nor the other way, not businessmen, not other. It's only a very small group in Egypt with a very small group in Israel. So it's not something that we can rely for the long term. This is one of the things about peace between countries or regimes and not between peoples.
Other questions? Yes.
Thank you very much. It's Mustafa Gulay from Turkey. I'm a second-year graduate student. Thank you very much. It was really insightful. And I'm doing my thesis on Lebanon, actually. I was in Lebanon this summer. And one observation I made is that, I mean, right now there's an economic crisis and people tend to not hold Hezbollah accountable for that, because I think the common understanding right now, because of the religious background of the tensions and the civil war history, people do not want to get into another conflict, although I think Hezbollah is very much responsible for what's happening right now, even economically. So is Israel, wouldn't it be in the interest of Israel to isolate Hezbollah from Iran in confronting, rather than taking a categorical approach in terms of its security concerns with regard to Iran? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So really what you're asking is, would it be in the interest of Israel to attack Hezbollah first in order to...
Not really, actually. I'm sorry. It's I think Hezbollah is there to stay because people just do not want another conflict because of the civil war history. So wouldn't it be better for Israel to politically engage? Yeah, it might sound, I know, quite biased, but I was genuinely curious if that would be a strategy for Israel.
Basically, I don't think, first of all, you need two people to dance tango, I was told, though I don't know. But I don't see any, they don't even are willing not just to meet us. You know, if a Hezbollah member or if a Shiite, even a Lebanese will enter this room, he will go out. I don't see how any real connection. And the second thing is, what kind of arrangement can you come with someone who represents an ideology, an organization, and belongs to, clearly it's like Iranians, that they don't want your existence, they don't believe in your existence, they don't agree to your existence. You can have debates like we had with and even clashes with Egyptians, Syrians over borders, but basically they understand, okay, this is the state of Israel, is here to stay, and when you talk to a Hezbollah member, we are here only until they can throw us out. So it's very difficult to come to any understanding with them. I have a history of trying to talk with them. This is not something I think will be possible, unfortunately. And the problem internally in Lebanon, it's very simple. No one can cope and stand against Hezbollah because he's endangering himself. Look at the Prime Minister, his son, and everything. Look what happened. If you try to stand against Hezbollah, you are dead. Literally. No, not going around. They will murder you. That's it. It's cut and short. And let's see what will happen with political protests and so on in the US. In whoever protests is dead. And probably you will lose your motivation very quickly. And this is what happens in Lebanon. They have great economy problem. Who wants to start coping politically with Hezbollah? It's not. I don't see a way. Maybe you see, but I don't see a way. Unfortunately.
Other questions? Yes.
Hi, my name is Ellie Batat. I'm a second-year master's student. I was wondering how, from a strategic standpoint, Israel views the protests in Iran and whether that maybe adjusts strategic thinking on, there's cracks in the system against Khomeini, or what that means moving forward.
I don't know if there is an Israeli view to that, but you put in a room 10 Jews, you have 15 opinions. I don't think that we have a view. I don't think anyone really understands it. From my point of view, this is not something that the regime cannot handle. The West really like to cling to it, because then you say, we don't need to do anything about Iran. It will fall. Now, Americans are saying it since 1979. Every year it's just in the summer it's going to happen. Not saying which summer, but it will happen in the summer. I don't see it happening. I see the regime understanding the problem, coping with it. I see the steps that they are taking. And unfortunately, I don't understand so deeply what's happening, but I see that the regime is still strong. It's proxy organization. I don't really see a big change. We really love to see it, and people dream about dreams, but we've been through that since 1979 so many times. We said that such a revolution cannot hold. It cannot be that for a long time there will be a religious regime that will hold. Well, it's holding quite well, unfortunately, again.
Question in the back, I saw. Yes.
Good afternoon, Jan. Thank you so much for your insights. So this is not a policy question, but I thought it'd be interesting to see your insight as a military man. So what do you think is going to be the demographic future of Israel? Because as we know, the country is fairly heterogeneous internally. But in case of a possibility of an escalation of population, of the non-Jewish population, vis-a-vis the Jewish section, how do you think that would influence the one-state solution, particularly since you mentioned the two-state solution is not really a realistic one? So I was just curious to see what you thought.
I'm just going to repeat it for the virtue of the recording because I don't know that it was audible. The question is, how do you see the impact of the demographic trends influencing the one-state solution, given that you spoke about the two-state solution? Is that a fair paraphrase? Great.
So, first of all, from a demographic point of view, the Jewish community is growing faster than the Arab. This is a fact that not many people know. Internally, there are different groups within Israel, Jews, Orthodox Jews, other Jews, and there is a change. But if you look at the entire population, the Jewish population currently grows faster than the Arab. Now, why I'm saying it? 5-10 years ago, when you go to school, and I learned Middle East studies too, they would all put us with these tables and show us how in a few years Israel will become an Arab state, and what happened is the vice versa. Why? I can get you the explanation. The Russian immigration, other immigration from other places, France, the Orthodox Jews grew as a group very much, and they are growing as they are very so. It's very hard to anticipate population changes within this region. One fact is clear, that Israel is very dense. You know, when I was most of my life, we were like 3 million. We are more than 10 now, and it's a very small space. And this is where the big problem starts. There is really a lack of ground within Israel, and Israel is very dense. And I don't think it's about the demographic is not the problem. The real question is, some of the political wings in Israel think annexation of the West Bank is on the benefit of Israel. And this will bring a huge Arab population into Israel, and this will change the demographic situation between the two groups. I think the annexation is not a good idea. I don't think it will help the state of Israel, and it will not help the Palestinian population. For the time being, I think that separation is better, but this is my view, and I think I have a very detailed plan in my head of how it should be done, because I was one of the people who worked for Sharon as an officer with the disengagement. I know what he thought, I know what we put on the maps. It is possible, it is complicated, but it is possible. But there, at the end, it will be decided politically. But I wouldn't trust here the regime, the demographic trends that you are indicating. It's changing.
We've got time for one last question.
Sure.
Everyone's
Maybe
pointing.
two.
You want to take two, Professor?
No, we can go for 10 more minutes.
Okay, perfect. I was just being.
Yeah.
So we'll begin here. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for your time. My question was kind of relating to the revolution in Iran, as you had indicated. So what's happening in Iran is they're fighting for the end of state-sanctioned violence, for human rights, for freedom and dignity, which many Israelis are supporting. And as an Iranian American, I really appreciate that. But ironically, also Palestinians are facing state-sanctioned violence from the military that you helped lead. And so with that, Palestinians also want human rights, equality and freedom, just like Iranians do. So my question is, what do you see as the difference between the oppressors the people of Iran are fighting and the oppressors who Palestinians are fighting? Thank you.
So I'll just repeat it for the benefit of the recording again. Basically, can you assess the distinctions and the similarities between the oppression taking place against Iranian citizens versus the lady's view that there's oppression taking place against the Palestinian Arabs? Is that fair paraphrasing, more or less?
Yeah, just the irony, I would say.
I think, first of all, it's the big difference is the Iranian regime is fighting its own people. The Israeli forces are fighting terror organizations. They're not aiming at the civilians. We are not controlling the West Bank. We are not controlling Gaza, and we'll talk about Gaza because this is a good example. All the means that we take are not intentioned against the Palestinian population, but against terror organizations that are aiming in Israel. Now, having said that, everyone who fought terror organization knows that it's very hard to make the distinction and to fight with like a surgeon and to go only to the terror. When you're fighting terror organization inside the community, inside population, you are hurting also civilians. It's true about Israel. It's true about other countries that are trying to do good things in the Middle East. Now, it's a big difference. This is the big difference between what the Iranian regime is aiming at these civilians because he wants control over them. We want no control over them. But if we need to avoid a suicide bomber to attack an Israeli school, we need to take the means. Sometimes when you do it, you hurt also civilians. So I think the big difference is the heart of the meaning of what you do, the starting point from what you're doing, and it's very different. You are taking it to Iran because now it's on the news, but I hardly hear the same complaints to what Hamas is doing in Gaza. Being a woman in Gaza today is one of the hardest places on earth to be a woman, because you are under the Hamas. So unfortunately, the Palestinians suffer from two things. On one side, they are suffering from their own regime in the Gaza Strip. And in the West Bank, whenever Israel has to interfere in counter-terror, it has also implications on the population. And as hard as we try not to harm civilians, we need to defend our people. And I can give you millions of examples of how it looks like, but I give you one in order for you to understand how difficult, especially for the forces, to do it. And I was the Gaza Commander Division. I was responsible for the security of the Israeli population around Gaza, its small villages, kibbutz, and other small communities. And every morning they used, at 8 o'clock in the morning, when the bus takes the kids to school, Hamas would start shooting mortars at the collection of the students. Now, in one time, this mortar was shooting from a Palestinian school. I had full artillery that can be operated into it. What do you do? On one side, you have Israeli students going to school at the collecting time that also in Israel, it's a yellow bus that's coming to collect them. On the other side, you have, and I saw the school with the UAV, and I saw that the Palestinian school is full of small children. I don't envy myself at that situation. I don't want to tell you how hard it is to take the decision. What do you do now on both sides? So I think really this is just an example, and I don't think there is any comparison between this or the security agency in Iran now opening fire at protesters in order to get control. This is the major difference between it. It doesn't mean that even as a person and as an Israeli, I don't feel really, it's killing us every day. The fact that I have to send my kids to such an operations to work in Gaza or in Nablus or in order to try to avoid terror attacks. And I know that on the way they will have to operate and execute means that will also hurt civilians. This is, I think, if you got my intention to what the difference is, and it's a big difference.
One last one.
No.
Thank you very much. We spoke briefly about this at our table, and I'd be interested in maybe furthering the question. How do you, regards the future of security of Israel regarding the West Bank, with the recent coalition and National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir taking control, and obviously Otzma Yehudit and some of the other affiliate groups have had some, issues with their how should I say, civilian lifestyle in the West Bank areas, right? So then, does this not maybe seem as if it could further violence and that, to me at least, looking in the U.S. context?
First of all, let's make some
Sure.
order. The Minister of Internal Security in Israel is not responsible for the West Bank.
Sure.
He's only responsible for Israel in the 67 borders, the internal.
Absolutely.
And in that area, we have a lot of problems that he has to deal with, and this is why he took this position. The defense minister is responsible for, so I don't think that in this sense there will be a change. It's a different government. It will have a different policy, for sure. Then we'll see a change. What will be exactly the change of policy, for instance, towards the West Bank and what is developing now in the West Bank? And as you know, there has been a development since the the Palestinian Authority is weakened. Its leadership has weakened a little bit, and then there is more Israeli involvement, direct involvement, in the operations for counter-terror within the territories.
Do you see a possible problem with, and I understand his prerogative as his position, but the rhetoric that some of his supporters, especially in Hebron, for example, some people live amongst these Palestinian populations in a minority population, and that's not the issue. More so, the issue is, you know, furthering this almost one could say extremist ideology, anti-Arab ideology. Do you think that that's a security threat to Israel? It seems like it could be an ignition.
No, I don't see it as a security. It's more a political issue. This Jewish population in the West Bank will get more support today because this part of the government, this is their part of ideology. It's not a matter of what I think, but this is, and they will be backed. But on the other side, I don't think it will have any practical differences because the Israeli law and they're under Israeli law will be fulfilled there. There will be no change around it. But this government will have, let's say, more motivation to build more in the West Bank and to settle more and to help the settlers in the West Bank. And this will probably arise problem and also security problems. This is always where it is. On other lines, I don't see it. Yes, this wing has grown its strength in the political system in Israel. That's for sure. It's a big discussion why, but it's not at the